Hey Brandon, thanks for coming on, man.
Thanks for coming in. Really appreciate it. Thank you. I never pass up the opportunity to talk shop on the topic of bodybuilding. Absolutely not.
Great. And how you been doing, man, over the last while? I know it's been a long time since we spoke. I think we met, and it's probably the first and last time that we met in person was uh, right before the pandemic.
Yes, that was WNBF Worlds, and that was a fantastic show. It was such an awesome piece to have, like the meeting of so many countries. I mean, that was a truly international show. There was people there from all over the world. It was awesome. Yeah.
Well, and you just absolutely smoked me. It was the end of my competitive season, and it was like probably my worst showing. A very very long season, but yeah, you looked amazing, man. Um, that was the end of your competitive season that year as well, right?
Yeah, essentially, I did one more show after the WNBF Worlds, and that was in Portland. And it was a bit of a basically when I booked my trip to the US, I just went and booked 3 weeks, and I just wanted to hit 3 shows over 3 weekends. And I definitely knew I wanted to hit the INBA Universe and the WNBF Worlds. And I just found another show the next weekend, which happened to be an OCB show in Portland. And I didn't know much about the geography of the US. So I didn't know Portland was a bit of a there's not much happening in Portland. So I did that show, but it was a rather disappointing show. I wanted to really challenge myself and go up against the best, and that's why I went to the universe and to the WNBF. So I had one more show, but pretty much the
Mm,
last show was the WNBF. That was the last big one.
yeah. So for those who don't know you, do you want to intro a little bit about yourself? I know we just kind of jumped into your competitive season, but maybe some people don't know who you are.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Brandon Kempter. I'm based in Australia, and I have a company called BK Conditioning, and I specialize in preparing drug-free bodybuilders for the stage. But in particular, within physique sports, in particular, bodybuilding and physique slash figure is kind of my game.
And you're a pro in some organizations, right? A pro bodybuilder.
Yeah. Alongside that, yes, I am a INBA pro and a ICN pro.
Nice. I remember when I was talking to a friend a couple of years ago, and I was talking about pro natural bodybuilding. He was like, "How much do they get paid?" Because you're like pro. It's pretty it's pretty funny. So it's like you get a salary of like 100K a year. Um, but yeah,
Basically, it's biking months. That's about it.
yeah. It's the same for a lot of sports. I mean, um, yeah. So I guess the topic today we want to chat about is like how do you set up a contest prep? I know that this is a topic that I've talked about before on the podcast. Can't remember the episode number, but it was a good while ago with Peter Fishing, I think it was. But everybody's different. So I guess to start with the first question is how many weeks out would you like either with yourself or with the people that you work with, would you start a contest prep? I know a lot of people we see within the kind of open or untested bodybuilding pretty short preps and pretty dramatic transformations within that time, but then in
Amazing.
in natural bodybuilding it's typically quite longer, quite a bit longer.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, I definitely agree. There's quite a difference in the contest preparation duration and the result that we can create between obviously natural and enhanced. Look, the specific duration of a contest preparation obviously comes down to the starting position for the athlete and the conditioning requirement for the athlete. Obviously, once we get into men's physique, bodybuilding, the conditioning requirements for the category are potentially infinite. Obviously, if we're in lower categories like men's fitness and females bikini, etc., then they need to be somewhat lean but not too lean. So it's hard to put an absolute on that, but if we were to put a generalized range on it, I would say somewhere around the 25-week mark would be sort of a general contest preparation duration for most individuals, occasionally a little bit longer. But from my perspective, once we get up to about 35 weeks, that really is the maximum duration to show number one that an individual should require to get contest ready. If they require beyond the 35-week realm, I would say that they probably didn't nail their pre-preparatory phase overly well, and perhaps they should, reconsider their season.
So, yeah, I guess that's a good point. But then it's definitely easier for you and I. So for example, when I'm working with clients who kind of compete, I usually in my head kind of guess, okay, they're probably going to be this weight on stage, so it helps with the rate of loss, and yeah, exactly, essentially how fast we need to push, etc. But for people who are not on stage, and I remember when I first competed in 2013, I think it was, I thought I was going to be like 190 pounds on stage. And I think I was like 205 pounds or something like that. And then I ended up being like way lighter than that. Like I think it's 170 plus. I probably could have been leaner. And that's what a lot of people don't realize. They're like, yeah, I've probably got maybe 20 pounds to lose. And you're like, you actually got like 45. How do people kind of, or how do you guess that, I guess? Or is there any tools that you give to people that aren't coached to kind of guess?
Look, I think not being coached is really, it just in general is a very challenging piece, particularly for first timers, because most first timers, just as you mentioned, will completely underestimate the volume of total body mass / fat mass that they must lose in order to reach top level conditioning. From a coaching perspective, there are occasions where I lean on a body composition assessment tool, like potentially a DEXA scan at the start of a contest preparation, just to use that as a means of formulating the contest preparation projections. However, like there are occasions where I use that. However, these days, for the majority of individuals I work with, I will use a visual assessment, and I will use their body height as a reference. And from there, I'm usually able to estimate stage weight plus or minus a couple of kilos quite well these days. So usually I'll use that. I'll use an estimation 9 times out of 10.
And to be honest, it's probably one of the best things to do. It's just guessing, and it just comes with, or at least what I think is, it just comes with experience. Because I don't know how I personally learned that. I guess just from following it and coaching and being coached myself for probably 10 years at this stage. It's just, but you need to kind of know that, because otherwise you're just like, well, how fast do I lose for this person, or how much do I need to go? So you'd mentioned a little bit about the kind of pre-contest preparatory phase. What exactly does that entail?
Well, basically, the way I look at it when it comes to creating a good physique-orientated athlete, whether it's bodybuilding or an alternate category, is that it really should encompass 4 distinct phases. Obviously an off season, so gain muscle, ensure that we are a perfect picture of health, make sure our symmetry and proportions in check, and then from there we have a pre-preparatory phase, then a contest preparation, then a recovery phase. Now the pre-preparatory phase in my views is simply a time where we do exactly that, pre-prepare the body for the contest preparation. And this is usually something that would occur several months before the commencement of the contest prep. It generally involves making sure that the starting body composition is appropriate. So if we need to run a dieting phase from the peak of the prior gaining phase to set that up, then we'll do that. And for a lot of individuals, it also involves some lifestyle modification, making sure that their environment is set up for what is to come in the contest preparation. Because as you know, contest prep is one of those all-consuming endeavors, and you need to make sure that everything is, in your life is as systematic and routine as possible. And that's part of what we do in the pre-preparatory phase.
Yeah, I think you made a good point there. It's quite consuming, and that's even coming from yourself or myself, who are more experienced in this and can probably manage it better, or it doesn't have as much of it, or it didn't seem as consuming, because we already love doing this stuff and are used to it. Whereas if you're somebody who kind of thinking of a good physique or of good genetics, or I'm thinking of doing this for the first time, it can seem way more consuming for them, because they may not have the habits set up that like I remember I was doing a crazy amount of steps in my last prep, but
Yeah.
thinking back now, it's like more than double what I'm doing now, but it didn't seem so consuming. But actually, when I think about it, it was really time consuming. Like my whole life was I was basically like cooking or resting or training or doing some cardio. So what kind of habits are you looking at? Like what sort of setups would you get someone ready for? Because obviously jumping 2 feet in straight into a contest prep probably isn't the best idea for a lot of people. It seems like this esoteric thing or something that's like really cool. Like I want to look like that. But what are people may not be ready for? What do you get them set up in that phase?
Well, as a start, I think it's really interesting what you mentioned before with regard to being more experienced and learning how to sort of sectionalize yourself in your day so that you can be a bodybuilder when you need to be, and you can be, student, family man, businessman, whatever, or woman for that matter, external to that. You do get better at that over time. I think the more contest preparations you do. But in general, we make sure that, we've got the space in our life to dedicate a sufficient amount of time to the craft. We make sure that we've got the time availability to get all of our training in and do so consistently. We make sure that our life is structured in a way that, we're able to tick the boxes when it comes to our nutrition, and make sure that we've got some solid routine in the off season surrounding our nutrition, so that when it comes to contest preparation, we're not taking a giant leap to be able to meet our nutrition with that level of consistency and adherence. Rather, we just need a tightening up of habits. And I think that the more advanced individuals become, the easier it is to transition to contest preparation. A new athlete, may have only just learned how to weigh foods and integrate that side of things, into their life. Whereas an advanced individual, even if they have a period of intuitive eating in the off season, they know how to transition to, weighing foods to the gram as is necessary in the contest prep. And obviously what we do in the contest prep, it's not something that's maintainable in the long term, but it was never supposed to be. It's something we do to achieve the result for the stage, and then we exit that. But the pre-preparatory phase is about it's about setting up those systems so that, okay, contest prep's upon us, cool. We have the time to train. We've got the organization within our day to hit our meals, etc. Essentially.
Yeah, really good points there, and also the point that it's not sustainable. I think, I don't know. Like, there's multiple reasons why people think it might be sustainable. It's you've got people who, well, obviously in social media or news, like it's always the extremes, the extreme best and the extreme worst. So we see like the worst, craziest gun shootings and all this sort of stuff on social media, and then we see like the best physiques and the most amazing feats of greatness. And then people think that's the normal. And we see these great physiques like of people, either they're in contest shape, or they're not natural, and they've just got extremely amazing genetics, or able to stay leaner. And then people think that's the norm. And then because I a lot of time I get people reaching out to me, they want to do a contest prep to get in shape but not actually compete. So I don't know if you coach anybody or work with anybody that doesn't actually compete, but how do you change, if you do you follow any different kind of approach with those sort of people?
To be totally honest, at this time, and realistically, of the last 2 years, I haven't worked with anyone that's not contest related in some way. Obviously, I have a good portion of my coaching cohort of which are in the off season, but obviously, we're still, preparing and improving on their physique for the next stage showing. But just to revert back to your prior mentioned topic with regard to individuals that reach out and they tell you they want to do a contest preparation but not get on stage. I definitely have had individuals, put that in their application, and I always find it an interesting piece because, as you can relate, so much focus and dedication goes into creating that top level physique. And personally, I don't know about you, but personally, there is absolutely no way on this, on God's given earth, that I could ever rationalize the sheer sacrifice and effort investment required to get into stage conditioning if there wasn't a stage there. There's no way that I'm going to put myself through that for a photo shoot. Like, I love the photo shoots that I did when I was in comp shape, but I wouldn't do it just for that. And generally speaking, when someone reaches out to me and says, like, I want to do a contest prep and I'll just see, and not get on stage, or if I feel like it, I'll get on stage, I usually decline, because, well, there is just no way that you could that anyone, I think, could rationalize the effort investment required unless they, are 100% all in for the stage. So it was an interesting piece.
Yeah, no, I agree. I've never done it myself. Like, I've never said I'll do a contest prep but not compete, because I compete. But yeah, it's, even if you do start to do that, I think it's probably really difficult to actually give your best, or to even get your best outcome. Like, even now, I like the shows that were in Ireland were cancelled, gyms are closed. Like, it's so much more difficult to kind of motivate yourself when you don't even know there's going to be a show coming, or anything like that. So yeah, I agree. And I do think, yeah, I've heard people say something like that. They'll do a contest prep for a photo shoot or something, but they're like, habits or their actions don't align with what's actually needed to be in a contest prep. And it's understandable, because you just said that it's not something that is really feasible or something that you can do. So yeah, it's a very interesting point.
You can't give yourself an out. You have to go all in. And I think that goes for pretty much any really big goal you have, is you have to go all in. You can't have doubt in your mind. Otherwise, if that's an option, then when things get challenging, you will opt for that option over persevering and pushing through, discomfort. And, within contest prep, it's like we're saying, it's not a sustainable piece, but that is okay. I mean, if you had a goal, let's say a financial goal, and you had to work a 50-hour work week, you would do that. You would be able to do that for 10 weeks or whatever to achieve said goal, but you couldn't do it forever. Same goes with contest preparation. You can't do it forever, but that's okay. It's not supposed to be forever. It's only for the specific duration of the contest preparation. We're going to custom build this physique for the few minutes you're on stage. Maybe we're going to do it over a few weekends. And then as soon as possible, we're going to retreat back to a healthy body composition and get back to the business of building and, pushing into our off season.
Yeah, I think it's because if you had like a Venn diagram, people think, and I'm not really sure why, but there is some crossover, but like health and being in shape, and then bodybuilding, contest prep, and they're like mutually inclusive. There's some overlap. Of course, you get fitter, or you get leaner, you do get healthier, and you look better, but they're not the sort of things you do to get in shape and stay, beach lean, or stay lean forever. But that's the way a lot of people approach it. So true, yeah.
I think that when it comes to health in general, it all comes down to of an appropriate dose. Extremes in whichever direction are not a productive piece. It's like being excessively fat is almost certainly going to come is going to come at a cost to your health. And on the opposite end of the pendulum, being very, very lean is not an overly healthy environment to exist in. Somewhere in the middle, absolutely, that would represent an ideal condition. So
yeah. Anyway, we're getting a little bit off topic. So to come back to the contest prep. So what sort of rate of weight loss are you looking at? Do you divide that by, let's say we're going to stick with 30 weeks. Do you just say 30 weeks? Okay, they've got 30 pounds to lose, or whatever, 12 kilos. We do that. We split that then by 30, or do you focus on a higher rate of loss at the beginning and then kind of taper it down and slow it down towards the end?
That's a really great question. Basically, what I would do is, if I had 30 weeks, for example, the first thing I would do is take off peak week. That's a nothing week for me. We're not actually going to be focusing on losing through that final week. I would then proceed to take an additional 4 to 5 weeks off. And that is basically the time I have up my sleeve for life, slow weeks, etc. And then with that remaining duration, I would put in place a rate of loss that declines the deeper we go into contest preparation. And the logical rationale for that is because we can only liberate so much energy per unit of fat per unit of time. And that essentially means that in the period of our contest prep where we have the most fat, the start, we can afford the largest deficit and run the least risk of degrading lean tissue. And conversely, at the end of our contest preparation, particularly when we're going from lean to exceptionally lean, our capacity to supply that deficit with energy exclusively from free fatty acids is somewhat compromised. So we need a slower rate of loss towards the end. So what I'll usually do is reverse engineer a contest preparation. I have their starting place in terms of total body mass, their estimated stage weight. I will then work and reverse from there. I know I want my athletes, a couple of kilos, 2-3 kilos off stage weight at 10 weeks out. And it's and from there, I'll continue to reverse engineer it. So that at the start, we're probably person dependent, working at a 1, maybe even a 1.5% per week, rate of loss. And obviously that declines throughout the contest preparation. And we obviously need to make sure our timeline, factors this in.
You made a really good point about the kind of factoring in time for life or whatever. Even across 30 weeks, it's like that's more than half a year. Things happen, things come up. And some weeks they just doesn't drop. It's a really good point. So what about then the deficit? Do you create that through diet or diet and cardio or diet and some form of activity?
Yeah, well, look, it'll be a combination of both, but it is person dependent, and it's largely dependent on the individual's environmental factors. So for example, if you're a sedentary individual like me, I work on my computer, I sit down for realistically a minimum 8 hours a day, more than likely longer. I'm probably going to be a good candidate for, adding formal forms of cardio because my non-exercise activity thermogenesis has me averaging around 3,000 steps per day, which is quite dismal compared to sort of, what is considered a sort of healthy-ish realm. So aside from what I'm doing within my training, my activity, my PAL, my physical activity level is quite low. So an individual in my scenario, probably a good candidate for adding cardio when it's necessary. Conversely, for someone who has, a rather active day, more than likely as part of their occupation, considering we spend approximately 35% of our life at our place of working, those individuals, we probably don't have to, leverage an increase in energy expenditure to supply the energy deficit. We can more than likely do that solely through nutrition. However, I will say this in general, particularly at the start of our contest preparation, I would prefer to make the diet work harder for us rather than add additional cardio, simply at the start, simply for the sake of being of less inconvenience for the individual / athlete, and because we have the ability to do so at the start. Really for me, cardio is a means of supplementing the energy deficit that we're creating through our nutrition, because to supply it solely would be, we just wouldn't have enough time in the day. We'd be walking all day or doing whatever facet of cardio we're doing. So I look at it as a supplementary piece, and it's sort of used on a case-by-case basis.
Would that be like step count or like on the treadmill or sprints or something like that?
These days, I generally recommend steps. Obviously, a step counter is an imperfect tool, but it is the best tool we have. And if we're using it, in a fashion of which most individuals do, then it's going to be accurate enough to get us in a ballpark. There are times where I have individuals that might work on a boat, for example, or ride a motorcycle to work. And those are occasions where, okay, the imperfections of this tool are going to be highlighted and we might not be able to use it as effectively as we would others. But in most scenarios, it's going to be step output. It's a simplistic and convenient means of getting into a ballpark with our daily energy expenditure.
So a motorcycle increases your step count, does it?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
so I ride a motorcycle sometimes. If I ride or if I go on a jet ski, I'll get 10,000 steps just riding. So
Yeah. It's like you
yeah,
got like 75,000 steps today. Good job.
yeah. Cost me very little energy expenditure.
Yeah, very very efficient. On the actual the topic of energy efficiency there, I've been thinking recently about like cardio and step count in a contest prep, and as you probably know, because you said you're doing a master's in exercise or sports nutrition, is
Yeah.
in the kind of endurance sports and like very high level when people have or suffer from like the relative energy deficiency, there seems to be potentially some sort of economic efficiency, whether it's through exercise or utilization of food or carbs and or not carbs of food, being able to like extract more energy from the food, or just being more economically efficient with the biomechanics of the exercise. It's not 100% clear, but that could potentially be happening when you get like very lean and you're doing a ton of exercise. So it's like there could be a point where it's like, yeah, you're doing more steps and or more activity, and yeah, of course you're lighter, so you're going to burn less calories. And then there's also that increased fatigue is going to mean decreased kind of neat outside the steps, so you're just moving around a
Yeah.
lot less, as you probably felt. But then actually in the steps or the activity itself, maybe you're burning less than you otherwise would if you did less steps as well. It's just something I've been thinking about and thinking
I'll
about
tell you
like in the
what,
future.
just to dig into that, pull that apart a bit further, I would 100% agree that obviously there is a variety of adaptation that occurs in the body pertaining to energy conservation in the diet and conditioning. And in reference to simplistic movement patterns like walking, we more than likely do become more efficient in general due to internal components, less proton leakage, yada yada yada. But I could definitely say that I have experienced an alteration to my walking gait in within periods of low energy availability, so specifically contest preparation, whereby in my walking gait, I lift my feet less, so with less height in the swing phase, which makes me essentially appear more clumsy because I have this tendency to trip over things. And I think most individuals can relate to that. They're walking around in contest prep, and obviously the cost of locomotion is less as a product of moving less total body mass. That's one thing, but also, you're walking with a pretty weird walking gait. And like you said, also the compensatory behaviors in other areas of your day. I remember when I caught up in person, when I used to work with athletes in person, I caught up with one of my athletes at 10 weeks out. And when he was talking to me, he was leaning on my desk, standing there, like really leaning there. And, that's a great example of like, okay, that, this is subliminal energy conservation in action here. Like I said, do you realize you're leaning on this desk? He's like, oh, not really. But, things like that's going to save you a few kilocalories here, a few calories there, etc. And obviously that has a cumulative effect across your day. And I could also relate to, my daily chores as part of my house, running the household will be like mow the lawn every couple of weeks, etc. In contest prep, I'm going to look at that lawn and be like, nah, that can wait for another, 3 weeks. So those are all like compensatory behaviors that come into play as a product of energy conservation. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think I do that in the off season as well. See, my girlfriend's not too happy about that. So, but for me, I don't know if it's about energy conservation, more so just being lazy. But yeah, so it's interesting because like in other kind of sports, if you will, we're trying to kind of avoid these adaptations as much as we can. But in bodybuilding, you kind of have to. It's just as part and parcel of getting super lean. It's like with the guys leaning on the desk, you weren't probably saying, "Oh shit, we got to increase your carbs so you have more energy." It's just like, no, it's just part of the suck, like almost to get into contest shape.
I think that is it's an interesting sport, and realistically, there's no other sport like it where an individual must present at such a low body composition. And we are definitely not a performance-based athlete, and when it comes to nutrition and exercise science, the majority of it is based around optimizing performance. For us, optimizing performance is important from the perspective of leveraging adaptation in the off season and maintaining it in contest preparation. But, you know, we're not a performance-based athlete in that we're not getting judged on a feat of performance. And, you know, when it comes to the adaptation we accumulate as part of the diet and condition, I think the goal is always to try and attenuate it as much as possible. But it's really important to note that you are dealing with a very complex series of biological systems, and the human body is wonderfully intelligent. So you're always going to pay your dues to the diet and condition, no matter how intelligent you think you are with managing your variables. Like, there will come a time where you're going to have to embrace the suck. You can't, you can't circumvent that. Yeah.
One thing I was going to ask you was, when dieting down, like, people tend to get flat, and when we say flat or full, like, we're often talking about how they look in terms of, I suppose, their muscle size. It's glycogen storage. Do you use that as a kind of proxy to make decisions? Obviously, there's going to be points where you're going to be flat, because you're not, ideally, yeah, of course, we'd love to just use our body fat as energy stores and keep our muscle glycogen as full as possible. So training is great and we look great. But how do you use that, or do you use that at all for a tool? I know some coaches will say, oh, you're flat, so we need to kind of increase food. Probably see a little bit more in the kind of enhanced side, because they're full a lot because of the androgens and stuff. But do you use that a lot?
Yes. I mean, the way I look at it is like this. I think a good coach, so I think coaching is good coaching is the amalgamation of science and art. So the science is a simple part. It's just knowing what variables to change and what influence it should have on the body. The art is being able to read objective and subjective, markers of progression and or regression, and to be able to make good judgments based on what you're seeing, and to know which combination of and to what magnitudes of variables you're going to change. And this is the hard thing about bodybuilding. When you're looking at like mentorships in bodybuilding, is that, or putting in place guidelines, you can't put anything in an absolute. And that goes for most things, but definitely in the interesting sport that is bodybuilding. So in regards to like fullness and flatness, like the first thing I'll say is that when people say I'm full or flat, or tight or soft, there's obviously no fixed definition. And this is where things get a bit ambiguous. But in general, I would say have the same definition. If we're full, we're talking about muscle glycogen saturation, and vice versa. If we're flat, we have low muscle glycogen saturation. And just like you said, you got to get flat to get lean. You got to, fill out. And as I say, you get flat to get lean, fill out to look lean. That's the saying I often have. And obviously, for every pro, there's always a con for basically everything in life, and the human body is no exception. We know we have to deplete muscle liver glycogen stores in order to persuade your biology to basically persuade your body to liberate free fatty acids from adipose tissue. There's no way around that. But we also know that when muscle glycogen saturation is low, it poses a threat to performance through decreases in central drive and, of course, fueling. We also know that when muscle glycogen saturation is low and muscle volume is low, it's theorized that by default, there is a higher proclivity for muscle protein degradation. Conversely, when muscle glycogen saturation is high, it's the opposite. Performance is great, etc. But the trade-off is we're either not going to lose fat if we're in a eucaloric environment, or we're going to put on fat if we're in a large surplus, or put on muscle, depending on how we're managing our variables. So I think, contest preparation is a game of give a little and take a little. Like, we're going to have to embrace the flatness sometimes, but sometimes we also need to fill up and give back to the system. You can't just take. You're going to break this. You're going to break down. And like I said, having good judgment is an important piece. And I will take into consideration all variables. So how's the individual's performance? What's their body weight measures doing? Do we have an alternate means of assessing? Do we have a means of assessing composition or estimating body composition? We use that. How are they just feeling in general in terms of perceived energy? How are they looking? Full, flat, tight, soft? Are they starting to string out as a product of being too flat? And then obviously adjust our variables based on that. So I'll take it all into consideration. And like I said, I think that's that's the art of coaching.
Mm.
It's quite fun like that.
Yeah, I would love to see some sort of research on like levels of flatness and kind of uh, body fat kind of oxidation or rates at versus muscle or protein oxidation rates. That would be great.
Yes.
So we know the perfect amount. It's probably never going to happen, but
It'd be
that.
amazing. We just need a whole lot of funding, some willing participants who want to get multiple muscle biopsies, and a researcher who's willing to dedicate their time for really a really small subgroup of individuals like us who want to get really shredded and
Yeah.
maintain high amounts of muscle.
I was actually listening to something about the initial original kind of liver glycogen measurements. We're taking like multiple liver biopsies
Oh
from
God.
athletes. I don't know how you would even get a liver biopsy. Is something go up your ass or something? And I don't know, but it doesn't sound too pleasurable. Seeing what like a muscle biopsy looks like. So yeah, it sounds kind of like you use the same variables that you would kind of think about refeeds or diet breaks. Do you add those in at all?
Yeah. Look, I do. I definitely add refeeds, diet breaks occasionally. It's sort of like as necessary piece. And when it comes to my approach, although I have a generalized system in the way I plan contest preparations, I really do feel out contest preps with each individual athlete, just because there's so much heterogeneity in one's responses. I mean, that is essentially that. I mean, the laws of biochemical individuality state that each individual will respond differently to a set dose of whatever stimulus or a drug or nutrition intervention. So I really feel it out.
So is it different for each one? Would you do like a 1 day, 2 day, 3 day? You don't have any kind of specific way you do it? Or what are you trying to look for in that? Is it more a psychological thing? Is it for physiological? Are you looking for weight drops, or do you use them when weight stalls, or is it all of the above?
Yeah. So look, when it comes to refeeds, I will say this. I will say the majority of the individuals I will work with will their contest preparation protocol will have a refeed protocol of sorts. My logical rationale for that is less a matter of slowing down metabolic adaptation, because I think it's quite challenging to cheat the system. You're going to accumulate adaptation. I mean, maybe if we could slow it down a little bit, that'd be great. However, the current research doesn't indicate that we can really do that. But I will refeed more than anything for psychological benefit, and also to leverage some performance from it. And then from the perspective of psychological benefit, I think that, particularly for individuals who have done a contest prep before, you understand that it's not short, sharp, and aggressive. It's long and progressive. It's an arduous process, and it wears at you. And that's really where the utility of refeeds and diet breaks come into play. Generally speaking, I would refeed as a start once per 7-day period. So once a week. And then quite possibly as we get a little bit closer to the show, it might become beneficial for us to refeed with a 2 time per week training frequency, individual dependent, in order to top up muscle glycogen saturation to the point where we can get a bit more fullness to the physique and leverage the performance we want from its inclusion. And when it comes to diet breaks, obviously like a diet break, I mean, there's no real strict definition, but by definition, it's obviously a series of refeeds that span anywhere from sort of 7 to 14 days. I'd be very unlikely to run a 7 to 14 day duration of energy maintenance. I feel as though that's quite excessive and elongates the process, or perhaps a little bit more than it needs to be. But I quite often run, I suppose you could call it a small diet break, anywhere from sort of 3 to maybe 4 or 5 days. And when I'd usually run that would be dependent on a variety of things. One would be if we have the room in our timeline, and 2 would be if the individual requires it. I'm getting to a point where the individual's reaching their breaking point in the contest prep, and we have the time up our sleeve, then I would say, okay, this might merit having a few days of energy maintenance to sort of allow the individual to recollect, like regroup before we run the next push phase.
Yeah, I think people really underestimate the psychological benefits. Not that you can necessarily separate physiological and psychological, because they're all one don't know, one being or whatever. But yeah, it's, I don't know, there's like in the research stuff, it's like questionable. Now there's a little bit showing the benefits. There's been back and forth, but when you're working with clients that are doing a contest prep and they are just, you can just tell that they're just like dragging their feet, you know, metaphorically speaking. It's crazy how much a refeed is like Christmas for me now. Like a refeed is just like, yeah, it's just nothing. There's no, it's not something I look forward to, or it's not something I do, but it's crazy when you're in prep. It's like, okay, I can get through these 6 days and can really like drag, or you can really gonna push through, because I know there's like light at the end of the tunnel, like on Saturday, I'm going to refeed and then get back into it. When you're like, oh, 15 more weeks of this, and I don't get to eat more food, it's just like, yeah, it's just impossible almost to deal with that mentally.
Definitely. And I think that, I mean, people got to realize that, I mean, when you're sitting, you know, nice and soft and cuddly and on a high energy intake in your off season, it's very easy to sit down and say like, oh, it can't be that hard. But obviously if in the dieting condition, like you said, it's a different story. I mean, food and shelter are pretty high on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and you really experience, you know, that internal need for energy sufficiency when you're in the dieting condition. It's profound. You know, it really is.
Have you ever done any ever like eaten any crazy things, like, or done any weird habits like when you're very lean?
I think we all develop some interesting habits in contest preparation as a product of just having such heightened food reward sensitivity. You know, some weird food combinations. People finish their contest prep, think they're going to be like this amazing chef that lasts about 3 weeks, and then they're fat and happy and all is good again.
Yeah.
But, you know, like I remember, you know, I was dipping like sweet potato in yogurt, and I was, you know, talking to my friends like, this is the most amazing thing. You guys should all try it. I'm going to be doing this in the off season. Yeah, right. It's a really weird thing to do. But, you know, at the time, my sense of smell and taste and just overall food reward sensitivity was so high that, you know, sweet potato tasted like the most sweetest thing on earth to me. So yeah, I definitely developed some interesting habits that I would say in the majority of cases served me in a beneficial manner in the context of the duration of the contest prep. Yeah.
Yeah, I spoke to, I don't know if you know Marty Kendall. He's a fellow Australian. He has a company called Optimizing Nutrition. But yeah, I spoke to him when I was doing my contest prep first, and I was talking about like, oh, taste sensitivity. Like, like will the pleasure that I get from eating like these high calorie dense sweetened foods change as I get like fatter, essentially? And it did, you know, like, I don't know if it's just exposure or body fatness. I think it's probably a combination of the both. And like when you're super lean, you just like really crave these high calorie dense foods. I think some work by Stefan Guillenet has looked at that. But then
Yeah.
when you've higher body fat, it's just like, you know, take it or leave it. But interesting, when I was doing contest prep, I used to bite the fish oil capsules.
Oh, yeah, I do that too. I would never do that in the off season. That is really out of sorts. But in contest prep, it's another flavor for the day, man.
Yeah, it's just like, I'm not gonna waste this like 9 calories and by just swallowing it. I'm gonna eat it. It's very, very strange, because like it's very odd. I used to also put the like Splenda or similar on the green beans and then like bake them in the oven. I saw
Oh
like a
my.
guy. Yeah, I saw someone, and I eat that like as like a dessert, which is really weird because they don't even really like eating green beans like normally. But yeah, so that's some strange stuff. Yeah, so I guess I kind of assumed this. We probably should have talked about this at the top of the conversation. But the approach that you follow with is it a kind of a higher carb approach? Do you ever follow sort of a ketogenic or a very low carbohydrate approach, or is that something individual?
Look, obviously the macronutrient distribution is very individual, but if we were going to talk in a sort of broad statement, I would generally favor, you know, protein sufficiency, sufficient fat, but probably on the side of lower fat, and obviously higher carbohydrate within the limitations of the caloric allotment we have set aside for the individual. And my logical rationale for that is that is that obviously we're trying to leverage our best performance in the suboptimal environment that is the dieting condition. So if the caloric intake can't isn't sufficient for performance optimization, then we better be damn sure the nutrition in terms of macronutrients is. And given that, resistance training is a predominantly, not solely, but predominantly glycolytic, endeavor, we want to make sure that we've got, as much carbohydrate as we can. So that's the general sort of talking in a blanket statement approach that I have with regards to nutrition. I think a ketogenic diet per se, like a proper ketogenic split, low protein, high fat, very low fiber, very, very low carbohydrate, and by default low fiber, has its place in terms of therapeutic benefit for in some clinical situations. But in the context of a bodybuilder, I think it's a fantastic way to lose a lot of muscle mass. One, through insufficient protein, and two is just through dismal performance that will follow from that dietary intervention.
Yeah, I agree. I think, well, one, probably a lot of people who try to follow it probably aren't in ketosis. I actually don't know anybody who's done a ketogenic diet for more than like 2 weeks. And then as you get leaner, everything compounds. So like if you're not actually in ketosis, but it's just a low carb diet, the hunger is probably going to be insane. The food volume is probably going to be very low. It just doesn't seem to make sense.
Not to mention the potential for micronutrient deficiency. I mean, when you're looking at 5% of your total caloric intake come from carbohydrate, I mean, how much, what's your vitamin and mineral profile going to look like? I mean, we accumulate a good portion of our micronutrient intake from our vegetables. So, and fruit for that matter. So I would argue that over time, unless you're really intelligent with what limited carbohydrate you have, and you're really intelligent with your supplementation, it's quite likely you're going to end up with a micronutrient deficiency of some sort. And once you have deficiency at that sort of level, then your performance is going to be further compromised. A healthy body does not perform well. An unhealthy body rather does not perform well. So yeah,
that's good points. So I think that's probably about it, Brandon. We're almost at time. So thanks for coming on. Where can people find more about you and the work that you do?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. You can find me on Instagram. I'm not as active as I should be, but you can find me there at Brandon Kempter is my Instagram handle. Or if you search BK Conditioning, I'm sure I'll come up on there. Alternatively, you can find me on Facebook. I don't have a business page on there, but I am on there with my personal account. If you flick me a message, I'm always happy to say good day.
Awesome. And when will you be back on stage?
Whoa.
When can you leave Australia?
Well, yeah, pretty much. I'll tell you what, we do have a good circuit here in Australia, but obviously I would love to go overseas. So when we can do that, and when I finish my recent bout of study, which I'm always doing something that's, but when I finish this next bout, then I'll be on stage. I'm hoping, fingers and toes crossed, 2023, which will be my longest off season, but I'm sure I'll be able to bring something special to the stage at that time.
Awesome, man. I'd love to see you on stage again. You bring that conditioning.
I'll see you at WNBF Worlds.
All right. Thanks a lot, man.
Thank you.